companies are the only ones taking the burden, and then the cost. I think international calls are almost virtually wiped out in terms of the revenue that was there. Now, you just make your online call and that is sorted. And I'm using that as one example. So we have to find ways and a creative way of ensuring that everybody contributes to the infrastructure. They pay for infrastructure in remote places. These are the operators here. And so we must take care of everybody. The challenge is now the other businesses, the small businesses that are beginning, they're starting and they want to grow, they want to become big. And I think if you look at the way KRA has structured this, it's not punitive to those startup businesses. At the same time as government, I want to get more resources so that we can pump into those businesses and see if they can actually grow. We need to build the intellectual property systems to make sure that we're getting the protection. Many of our innovations, they're acquired, not just the company, but even the people, everybody, and it's no longer Kenyan very quickly. And you've seen many of these companies immediately change, they become multinational or foreign companies, and they seem to have a better position versus the local company. So KRA is really walking a tightrope in how to manage this. But I can assure you in the conversations that have taken place, they have looked at how is any small business going to be able to grow in this environment and how they will benefit. And there are several things. One, we had said even those people who work online, they pay a flat fee of 10,000 a year. And that was something that gives them the credibility. They can go to the bank. Many small businesses, if you're not paying taxes, one of the big challenges is that you're worried if the tax inspector is coming tomorrow. And the tax inspector comes and then gives you a lot of other stories, and you end up paying even more than the actual tax. If we have a tax itself that you can actually pay, for every 100,000, you're paying 1,000 shillings, for instance. No, a shilling. Is it 1%, 1.5? 1.5. Yeah, for every 100 shillings, it's one. It's something that will allow you to sleep well. And I know it's a debate that we'll have, but over time, we'll be okay. And that's, I think, that would be my summary on where we stand on this.
Yeah, and you've just addressed the issue, I guess, of also plowing back into the sector, growing the sector. So not just, the issues that were raised earlier that KRA is just coming in to quote unquote reap where they've not sown, but you've just showed us the examples of where the government is investing in the sector and therefore growing it enough to generate enough revenue for the tax inspector, to come in and make that money. And I think that's important also. You mentioned when I see us the BBI report, I did note that it calls for a recognition of the Home Office, right?
Yes.
Because, most businesses, and even when you want to pay taxes, it's PO Box, Karuri or
national address system is coming.
Exactly. Yes. But I thought that was something, that was progressive because, many of the online businesses, we're moving from the traditional. How many people still have a post box, but many people are on WhatsApp, are on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter.
And those are not paying tax. Those Instagram, Twitter, and all those people you're talking about.
Right.
But I wanted to just say, this infrastructure where you're someone doing a keynote from France, unless government invests, there's no way we can do that. Unless government invests where now we're sending over 35% of revenue to the counties, how are we going to ensure that that money is being spent correctly? We must invest in the right infrastructure, because even that small business that requires, to run, if it's an e-commerce business, they want to be able to have those addresses, they want to be able to have the security, all the infrastructure that's required. So at least we have an agreement with the Treasury, and that money will be spent in the digital economy, and the president has continuously supported that. Thank you.
I think that answers Steve Chege's question about value for the taxes, plowing it back, growing the sector, because it's a win-win. You invest in the sector, there's more definitely that's coming out of there, more revenue, more taxes. It's a win-win for the economic development. And that's presenting the policy context in the country. But I wonder what, the context and the prospects are, on the continental scale. I believe we've got Logan Watt, who's the Executive Secretary of ATAF. and if he is with us now, perhaps we can hear from him on what the African context is looking like in terms of policy. Mr. Logan? Okay, while we attempt at getting him, let's come back here and continue to discuss this some more. By the way, I hope Stephen Chege is still with us from Safaricom. We'll be coming to that in just a moment. So Microsoft, perhaps we can hear from you in just a moment, Ms. Nderitu. Now, how the digital industry can work with government towards supporting revenue generation. What does that collaboration look like from an industry perspective?
Thank you for the question, Yvonne. I'm glad you've gone there, because when the CS Mushere was speaking, one of the things I thought about, as he helps in his ministry, as he helps drive innovation, one of the other ways KRA would look at, and because the CS ICT has access to all of us, the multinationals, when we operate in a country like this, and I'll speak for Microsoft, our mission is to empower every organization and individual to do more. So my mandate as being the country leader for Kenya is to ensure that we are enabling every individual and organization to do more. What that means is KRA's mandate is to collect revenue for the country. So then I am mandated to come and work with KRA to figure out how can I work with you, help you from a technology perspective to collect more. You may find some of the processes that you have as an authority require some form of digitization. And the CS mentioned earlier about hackathons. To drive innovation from a technology perspective, either through his ministry or even directly. Now the private sector, at least from the multinational perspective, we're able to come in with the muscle and with the know-how of having served other revenue authorities globally to help you innovate in that space and work with Kenyans, young minds, give them what the problem is and ask them to innovate around it, which is what we call the hackathons. So sit in a room, hack it until you figure out how to solve it. Then KRA is then able to pick some of this and implement it for yourselves. And as you implement, then you look at what gap you're covering and be able to then grow your revenue collection from that bit. So that's one way of doing it. Microsoft, you're very open to it. We do it all the time. We do it in different problem areas. But I also know the other multinationals, to be fair, who also operate in the country, would also have that kind of view. And I know the CS has, he speaks to all of us and he knows that we are willing to support in that aspect. Which then goes the extra mile, which is, and pause. I'm here as Kendi, a Kenyan, grew up in a village in Meru somewhere in the mountains. But then with this mandate and this access to these global resources by a company that is well respected. If you look at the top contributing companies globally, it's technology firms. Whether we talk Apple, whether we talk, I know we are third, Microsoft, others who I will name because they're probably competition. But we are the top, if you look at the top 5 companies globally, most of these are technology companies. So in which case can we bring that muscle out there? And most of these have representation here. So can we bring it from out in the world and bring it to Kenya? And the reason we can do that is because I am Kenyan, my counterparts are Kenyans, so we understand. And so we look at it from the eyes of Kenyans bringing solutions for Kenya. So let's take advantage of that. And we have that edge already.
Yeah, indeed. What about the issue of double taxation? And I think that was raised here on this podium earlier as well. Perhaps, Rispa, you could respond to this, seeing as you're in charge of domestic taxes. So there's many of those players in the sector who are saying, you know, there's the risk of double taxation in this sector. Perhaps you could address that issue for us as well.
I'll say, as far as the double taxation is concerned, those are conversations that are ongoing. But currently, and looking at the regulations as we've rolled them out, is that for an entity with a, first, there's the aspect of residence based here, and then non-residents with a permanent establishment, so physical presence in Kenya. So those ones then would also have corporation tax and all. So for them, any digital, any taxes paid from the digital economy will be offset as they are paying taxes. So that then should cover that issue of double taxation. Now, for the non-residents, and that's really where, that's the elephant in the room, the non-residents with no physical presence. So whereas, like I said earlier, based on statistics, we know they exist. Almost like saying you can feel the money, you can see, but you can't touch it. So for those ones, then we're saying once all the systems are set up, then whatever tax from that aspect then will be final tax. So that way, then we will avoid, we'll be able to avoid the issue of double taxation.
Indeed, and then there's the issue of transfer pricing that is the big one in the room. Perhaps between Engineer Thao and Mr. Mukesh, who would like to handle that? Mr. Mukesh?
Thank you. Before I talk specifically transfer pricing, I think there's something that perhaps we should remember, that through ages, there has always been business transactions. Somebody wants a good and somebody supplies it and there's a transaction. Or somebody wants a service and somebody supplies and somebody receives the benefit, and there's an exchange of energy or value. If you look at it in how things have evolved, that fundamental hasn't changed. If I'm buying a Microsoft product, nothing has changed in terms of the business. Mm-hmm. What has changed is the mode of delivery and the mode of payment. And if we demysticize that, then I think we find it a lot easier to grapple with taxation and the need to tax. Every country in the world, in one form or another, needs to raise taxation in order to promote development. Without that, citizens of a country will not be able to see the benefit of development. In some countries, Dubai, for example, they don't tax you directly, they tax you indirectly and quite heavily as well, if you really add up everything. So how do we achieve that objective? Is through taxation. But as I said, fundamentally, it's an exchange of a good or a service, and there's got to be a value transfer. So coming to transfer pricing, Kenya generates a huge amount of exports in the form of tourism, dead at the moment, unfortunately, but fundamentally tourism's been a big revenue earner. Tea exports, coffee, horticulture, minerals, and so on. Historically, what we have seen is that some enterprises, not all, some enterprises have chosen to keep some of those gains or earnings from those activities in a different jurisdiction where perhaps they pay a lower tax or they pay no tax at all. But the income and the benefit is derived from Kenya. So that's where the transfer pricing issues come in, that where is the benefit derived and is a fair share of tax being paid? Our efforts in that area have enhanced, as the OECD's director mentioned, and we are helping other countries in the region to also enhance their skills in that area. The important thing is that let's be fair. Let businesses be fair in paying their taxes. And if they are fair, then there isn't an issue of transfer pricing. But the urge to shift profit and pay less tax is what causes that. And when KRA teams go into business and say, look, explain what's happening here, and you're not willing to be transparent about it, that's when the issues arise. I think globally, as also there was a mention of base erosion, if we continue eroding our tax base, we can't do our development activity. And that's why it's an area of focus. Historically, possibly we've lost out, but we need to catch up. And that's why the area of transfer pricing is very relevant. And it's relevant not only for developing countries, but you find even the developed countries are focusing very heavily on that. You know, companies setting up centers, some of the names that you didn't want to mention, setting up establishments in Ireland, for example, low taxation, and they shift profits there. And you know, there've been big cases around that. So it's an issue that everybody's grappling with, and one has to be prepared that if you are going to shift profits, be prepared to face up to transfer pricing questions.
That's right. We've talked about, you know, the history of how we've come to this point. We've also talked about some of the benefits, the ways in which private sector can work together with government, the tax policies, you know, that would need to be in place. But digital technology is not without risk, you know, right, engineer? What are some of the inherent risks of digital technology to taxation? And what would any tax administration, such as the Kenya Revenue Authority, do to mitigate some of these challenges?
The biggest risk, I think, and the resistance is on data access and protection. Most organizations and individuals want to keep their private data private. And we at the authority respect that, and we have through the years ensured that we built in that capability and continue to do so, and to comply with all the relevant statutes and regulations to ensure that we meet that. So it's that nexus on the access to information and then the risk of data breach. How would that be managed if sensitive information was made public? So those are areas of risk that we look at very, very carefully and try and work at the same level as those who are pioneers and leaders in the digital space, so that we ensure that we give the same level of assurance and protection as these organizations currently do.
And I think an important development with that has been, you know, the Data, you know, Commission, whose commissioner was approved by the National Assembly yesterday, I believe, and is now awaiting formal appointment by the President of the Republic of Kenya. Do we still have Steve Shege on the line from Safaricom? If we do, I'd like to go back to him in a moment. But while he gets ready,
yes, I'm here, Yvonne.
How important is, you know, this issue? Like we said, the digital economy has been a disruptor, but never more than at this point with a pandemic, a global pandemic on our hands. And this can be to any or all of you regarding the importance of the digital economy and mobilizing resources within that economy now that we are in a pandemic and we are trying to ensure that we get resources from as many corners as possible. Everything has basically shifted online, you know, in the last 8 months or so, at least in the country, perhaps in the last year across the globe. I don't know who would like to take this, but let's talk about how important this is now in the COVID-19 era, and perhaps casting our eye forward in post-COVID-19 era. How would it look like? How important is it? Who would like to go first? Yes.
Yvonne, if you can hear me.
Yes, that's right into what I do. So our CEO, our global CEO, has been known to be quoted lately over the COVID season to say that we have seen 2 years worth of transformation happen in 1 month in the COVID season. And the reason that has happened is to even think, before COVID, we didn't imagine that we would actually have, leave alone first government. Government is on one end, but also private sector. We would not imagine that the Home Office would be such an honored space and people would actually work from home and thrive at it. Beyond that, if we look at, and this is back to the IG, Instagram guys, we have Kenyans who, and I saw, I don't know her name, but I saw she has 1 million followers in the last, she's a young girl.
There are many of them.
Oh, there are many.
So I'm really interested in that space. So,
okay.
Which
So I'm
one?
not
I
very
could probably
active.
tell you how many.
I'm not very active in it. But if you look at how many young profiles have come up in this COVID season, having over 1 million followers around the world, what that tells you, the digital space, and I look at it as, I've always preached this, technology is such an enabler and an equalizer, meaning you can actually be in Kenya entertaining the world. It's not like how before we waited for the Beyoncés and the likes to be the ones who have, they're hosting these entertainment platforms and have over millions of followers. You can actually figure out your content, be seated here, and be known as a profile around the world, which then tells you we can't avoid it. And because opportunity is given equally to all of us, if anything, we sort of have an advantage because we have, our average age now is what, 20? If I saw right, around?
Over 75% of the country's population is under 35.
Under 35, yes. Which tells you it's very agile minds. Well, I'm over 35, I'm still an agile mind, but just putting it out there. I'm not being against us all.
We believe you.
Yes. But it tells you over 70% of the population has the ability to be agile and has the ability to be shown the opportunities that lay forth for them. And these opportunities are not confined to a geographical area, which for you, Kiare, that in itself is such a playfield because it means businesses, any revenues, any advertising revenues that are in it. So you hit the entertainer and you're like, this is how many followers you have. This is how much you charge them. We need to see how you're remitting that to us. So they are using the platform, yes, which is a global platform, but they're able to bring the revenue in here. So how important is it? It's unavoidable. It is the way to go. It's the one thing that will actually give us an edge as Kenya, as Africa, as a developing world, to put us in an equal playfield. The same way when we talk about fintechs, you can't talk fintech without Kenya in the world. So in that same way, going forward, digital services, digital space is the way to bring us to the edge.
And that's a perfect segue to Steve Shege of Safaricom, because many of these young people who are online are running their small businesses, their SMEs, and that's been an important sector that I believe even Safaricom has been playing in. So Steve, how can SMEs use data and fintech to improve their competitiveness? Many of them are online, many of them are conducting their businesses there. So how do they get more competitive? Obviously, the more competitive they are, the more money they make. The more money they make, the more revenue is available for the Kenya Revenue Authority and indeed other revenue administrations, and all of that is plowed back into the economy. It's a full cycle. So how can SMEs use data and fintech to make them more competitive? Steve, I hope you can hear me.
Yes, I can hear you, Yvonne. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Excellent. Yvonne, it has been said by many speakers before me that this crisis has accelerated the take-up of data services. I mean, from our side, from a network perspective, we can actually quantify this in terms of the data that's streaming from our networks. We are now going above a petabyte of data every single day. You can use Google to see how big a petabyte is compared to our local understanding of an MB or a GB. This is a lot of data. What we have noticed during this crisis is that whereas people may not be going to the offices, they may not be going to the working places, they have shifted to working from their homes or cafes where they can get some Wi-Fi or any hotspot. So work is getting done. A lot of the industries that were still running before COVID have reoriented how they are working to be able to still serve customers and still do services over the internet. So it is an area that's growing. We are able to monitor it from a network perspective. We have had to broaden our network significantly. Voice traffic in our network has doubled in the last year or so, mostly the last few quarters because of COVID. So business is being done and businesses are still running. We ourselves at Safaricom, over 90% of our staff are working from home. I'm in the office today, but usually I could be working from home and doing exactly the same thing that I'm doing now. So work is still happening. We're supporting SMEs. We're doing different packages to ensure that they retain the ability to execute. When COVID struck, we doubled the capacity available to each fiber connected user, tend to be more SMEs and businesses. So if you had paid for a package for, let's say, 10 GB, we doubled it so that you can actually have the throughput that you need to conduct your business. So yeah, business is taking place through digital.
Yes, it truly is. Stay with us because I have, I think, one or two more questions for you. But I want to take it back to Pascal because we were talking about, we wanted to hear about, the African context and the policy, framework on a continental level because, like we said, we're all about sharing experiences and learning from each other. Pascal, if you're still with us and you can hear me, talk to us about the steps that African countries are taking to strengthen their regulatory capability and to make sure that there's an enabling policy and framework for the digital economy.
Thank you, Yvonne. Yes, I'm still with you, and I followed the conversation, which is extremely stimulating. African countries, I think, if we talk about tax and digital, but are equipping themselves pretty well with the African Tax Administration Forum. And by the way, we'll have to leave you at 10 because there is the General Assembly of ATAF, which I'm invited to speak at. But there is a good dynamic between African tax administrations within ATAF, for instance. As regards the taxation of the digitalization of the economy, ATAF issued a pretty good paper a few weeks ago, which is a very measured and thoughtful one on which path to follow, with the recognition that a multilateral solution is the best, even though it's not necessarily where developing countries will get most out of it. But also the recognition that absent a multilateral solution, there would be a narrow path towards DSTs, with a recognition that digital service taxes can be a bit disruptive. I think you had the conversation, who's going to bear the cost of the DST? Is it the company or the customer? And more likely the customer, but it sends a political signal, but this political signal shouldn't be at the cost of the competitiveness of the startups and other companies. So I think the ATAF paper is pretty well done. Also, in ATAF, there are a number of groups, including on how to engage in the digitalization of the tax administration. But beyond this regional grouping, I think countries taken individually have their own approach and their own commitment. As I indicated, I think Kenya is definitely one of the most advanced administration, and not only in administration, but in policy as well. I named a few groups you are a member of. I think that Kenya, being a member of the Forum on Tax Administration, which gathers 55 countries to date, 55 commissioners, most of them are OECD or G20 countries. There are just a few coming from non-OECD countries, and I think from Africa, except for South Africa, it must be Kenya only, which is a member of the FTA, and that not only gives Kenya the opportunity to participate to the work and get the benefits of this work of mutualization of practices, and so, but also bring the perspective of an African country, the perspective of a low capacity country, but which is moving fast. And that's where it's a bit refreshing to see that with the digitalization of the economy, you can move from pretty basic tax administration practices to pretty sophisticated practices. And that's where our goal in the Forum on Tax Administration, and we really want to work with African countries on that and other developing countries, is to see how we can use these technology change to really modernize tax administrations at the time where, let's not forget this, domestic resource mobilization is one of the keys for development. So that's the background that we need to keep in mind. And I mentioned the Russian example, which I think is fascinating, in particular for developing countries. I mentioned this because one of the former tax commissioner of Russia, Mikhail Mishustin, who is the one who initiated all that, he's now prime minister of Russia. So you can see that tax administration can bring you to the highest position when you do your job well. Thank you.
Indeed.
Scope for Fiji.
Indeed. Pascal, I know you have to go, but in 2 minutes or less, because we've talked quite a bit here about base erosion and profit shifting by multinational organizations and how they take advantage of certain gaps in the different tax systems. What would be your insights on policies and measures that can be used by African countries to prevent this from happening? If you can, in just a few minutes before you leave.
Oh, yes, absolutely. I mean, there is a whole range of measures. We developed 15 measures during the BEPS action plan. Some said, well, these measures are for developed countries. Actually, it's not true. These measures are for all countries willing to protect their tax base. So there may be a twist for from developed countries' perspective, but actually it's for everybody. So what are these measures? Very simply, putting an end to treaty shopping. Investments in Kenya must be taxed in Kenya, and the capital gains or the interests or the dividends shouldn't be shifted via Mauritius or via the Netherlands, to name two treaty shopping hubs. There is an easy action to take, which is to sign and ratify the multilateral instrument to stop treaty shopping. Kenya is in the final stage of signing the MLI or ratifying it. That's one very concrete example. Two, investing in transfer pricing capacities. You've done it. So Kenya here, I think, is a leading country. Three, reducing the ability of companies to over deduct interest. So limiting interest deductibility is something absolutely key. Another one, because you're also a capital exporting country. I mean, you're doing well and your companies are doing well. And we have a few of you talking today who are doing business outside Kenya, strengthening your CFC legislation. That's the legislation which allows you to tax your companies when they locate profits abroad. But the main issue for Kenya is rather to tax the profits of foreign multinational companies in Kenya. And that's where strengthening the definition of the permanent establishment, fighting treaty shopping, using the transfer pricing rules, but also using country by country reporting for risk assessment is extremely important. And we are fighting with Kenya for Kenya to have the largest access of CBCR, but that's something important. And that's where I have to recognize developing countries, African countries don't get enough. They have to fight, and we have to fight with them so that you can get the information from all European countries, from the US and others. So this is the menu of actions. They need to be all taken together, because base erosion and profit shifting is a comprehensive thing. It's not just, oh, there is one route here, let's close it. If you close it here, it will go there. So that's a comprehensive approach. And finally, I think support for further international reform, the pillar one, the pillar two I mentioned, I mean, the new nexus, new profit allocation rules, even though the impact on Kenya may be small, it would be positive, but small. That's the start of a change which will be important in the future. As regards putting in place a global minimum tax, I think it's key. Even though the primary taxing right would belong to the countries where the multinationals are incorporated, so the residence countries, actually, if you kill the use of zero tax jurisdictions or low tax jurisdictions, all the countries will benefit, including the source countries. And we've done an impact assessment which shows that if we put in place a global minimum tax, then the benefits will be, if not equally distributed, but will go to all countries. So I think that keeping countries together for that dialogue, acting at the domestic level, at the regional level, it's with all these levers that you can more effectively fight base erosion and profit shifting.
Indeed, and that's just to mention where we are in Kenya with the, I know you've watched the news and you've seen that avoidance agreement, the double taxation avoidance agreement between Kenya and Mauritius. So, just starting to make steps towards what Pascal was addressing in that there. I know he has to leave us, so I'd really like to thank Pascal Sanama. He's the director for the Center for Tax Policy and Administration at the OECD, and we wish him all the best in the summer
Thank you all.
right now. Thank you so much, sir,
Thank you.
for your time. Now, we have about half an hour to this, and I'd like to open this up to questions that are coming in from our audience who are joining us both here and virtually. Like we said, this time around, we are taking your questions via the Zoom chat platform. So continue to drop them in there, and we'll have as many of them addressed as possible. Also, if you're able to, please tweet about this. I mean, I think nowadays it happens automatically. It should. It's one of those platforms that we cannot ignore, just like this conversation that we cannot ignore. On Twitter at KRA Corporate is the Twitter handle. Please use the hashtag #TaxSummit2020. That's how we'll be tracking your feedback and tracking your questions, get them to our attention. So here's a couple of questions. Perhaps, I don't know if this would be to the CS or whoever else can take this. There's a question here. How is the government planning to deal with those businessmen and women who take advantage of tax holidays for startups and small SMEs and open businesses and then close them down after enjoying the tax reprieves? That's an interesting one. Or maybe Whisper, I don't know, or whoever, please guide me on who would want to answer this. Whisper is in charge of domestic taxes. So you have all of these, startups and SMEs. And indeed, that's also a big conversation that we're having now with the BBI proposals, providing, tax holidays for 7 years, a 7-year period for SMEs. So there are those who will be tricky in that sense, open the business, make their profits, and before that window is up, close them again, and they've made profits in that time. So taking advantage of that reprieve, how do you then, make sure or seal this loophole?
Thank you for that question. What I would say is just as at now we have very many issues, very many aspects. The current conditions have opened our eyes further to much more that is happening than what we probably have known. Is that we have come to that realization that whereas the intention is pure, even to give tax holidays, some people have gone overboard actually to abuse this. And again, then it creates what is no longer a level playing field, because then it's fighting those that some businesses are actually properly established and for the same reason, so it stops being competitive. So what are we doing? Some of the things you'll find that KRA as an entity cannot go it alone. So again, brings in the aspect of collaboration, both with the industry and with our policymakers. And then again, we're also reviewing, and we have actually to that extent, reviewed our laws. So basically going back to the drawing board and saying, this is what this was the intended purpose. Is it really meeting that? Are we really meeting that goal? Or have other entities then taken advantage of that gap or the window? So then we would have different industries, sector-based, looking at various sectors within the organization, focusing basically a sector-based approach, looking at those specific sectors because they are varied and they cut across, and also working with other institutions, company registrar, every other institution that then would have an eye on this person, whether it's immigration. So it's an issue, like I said earlier, collaborating with various institutions, knowing that, yes, we have collected a lot of data. Again, that is another area we are largely focusing on, use of data to manage our risk. So I think simply put, I would say that, but there's a lot that we are doing now to focus on all those gaps to ensure that everyone pays their fair share of tax.
Right, increased surveillance in that respect, yes. And data will be very important. Yes. Gathering that, knowing who's doing what, where, and when. There's one here on elaboration. Someone here requires more elaboration on the definitions: digital marketplace and digital service tax. I believe this would be fairly simple, but for purposes of the one who's asked this question.
Okay. So the digital marketplace is a platform. So the same way you'd walk to a shop and buy over a counter, that is a physical platform. That's someone with a physical presence. But instead, like we said earlier, the businesses have not stopped to transact. The businesses are there. The only thing is that they have moved onto an online platform. Now, the digital service tax is where the services, someone is paid a commission for providing that service. And that's actually what we've tried to define in our DST regulation. So there is a marketplace, the platform, and there's a service that is being provided for which mean a commission is paid, and it's that we are trying to aim for tax payment.
Which is 1.5%
1.5%
of gross transaction value
Yes.
that is conducted within that digital marketplace. Okay, I'm afraid many of the questions will be to you, and so this might be a moment. I think there is one more as well for Steve, so I hope he's still with us. While we line him up for that, because it's talking about the role that telcos can play. Here's another one. Can the tax without borders model be used so that Kenya and the Kenya Revenue Authority can tap into the required professionals in digital taxation? And this one goes on to say we need to get it right the first time as we begin DST in January of 2021.
Mm-hmm. Every implementation has its teething problems, and we are not claiming as scary that we have it right and it's going to be a perfect solution. And like we said earlier, it's also not a one-size-fits-all. Now, you'll find like countries, and probably at this point I would mention, there are certain countries that have taken very drastic policy measures, and probably not drastic from where they sit. Think about China, for example. China took a position where instead of the Facebook that most of us know, they have theirs that we call what? WeChat. And instead, so for their search engine, in place of their Google, they have one they call Baidu. So those are policy positions taken by different countries. So as a country, what are we doing? Apart from the collaboration and engaging with the policymakers, I think has been mentioned by previous speakers before, is that we have tapped into ATAF, we have tapped into IMF, technical assistance received by other organizations so that we can borrow and look at best practice from benchmarking. So we are also significantly increasing our capacity in this space. And maybe I would say something that going back to when transfer pricing was introduced in Kenya in 2006, what we noted back then was the market, the industry was way ahead in terms of knowledge. The sectors, they were way ahead, and probably that is what triggered actually the coming into play of our transfer pricing rules because of the case that we lost, because what he's saying is, if you have not set your regulations or your laws on how to tax this, then really you have no right to tax. But then we have become smarter in that, knowing that we do not have the monopoly of answers, and we have to approach this from a collaborative approach. Speak to the industry, like Kendi mentioned earlier. They have the muscle. What then, in engaging with them, can we borrow from them? And that is how KRA and even previous speakers have acknowledged that KRA continues to increase its strides in every aspect of taxation, again, to bring neutrality, equity, and fairness.
Yeah, that's right. There's one here on a centralized digital, system where you can have all information. And I believe that was towards your question about how you're ensuring that you catch the tax cheats and those who take advantage of that. We'll get to that in a moment. But here is one that perhaps could best be answered by Steve Shege from Safaricom. And the question is, telcos play a critical role in data protection. How will they support the digital taxation implementation? Is Steve still with us? I could read that question for him again.
Yes, I'm here, Yvonne.
Did you get it, the question?
Yes, I got your question.
Okay.
Yeah, so this has always been a very interesting fine balance, because by the nature of our work as telcos, we do have a lot of customer information based on calling patterns, and with mobile money also payment patterns. And what I said earlier stands. Whereas we have access to this data, anyone else who requires this data must follow the proper channels before they can get it. We are seen as a data processor under the new Data Protection Act. And that means that anyone who requires the data that we have, has to go through all the right channels. However, having said that, I think for the benefit of the Revenue Authority, we have sector statistics which we are able to share to indicate which areas of the economy are relying more on data, and it could be a pointer to them in terms of where to focus their energies. I'll give an example, because at Safaricom, we always look at opportunities. KRA is now working directly with Safaricom to collect payments in Nairobi, and in partnership with the Nairobi Metropolitans. This is an eye-opener for them as an opportunity of what can happen if this is rolled out to all the other 46 counties, whereby we move payments from cash to cashless entirely. It doesn't mean it has to be on M-Pesa. It could be on whatever other platform that is convenient to wananchi. And then you can see the huge transformation that happens in terms of collections. Also in terms of being able to match a service together with what has been paid for it. From an audit perspective, in terms of the audit trail, the opportunity here is really, really, really large. And we've been working very well with quite a number of the counties in the country. And most of them are using cashless through M-Pesa to actually accelerate payment. So the money goes directly from the customer straight to the coffers of the county. There's a receipt that's issued to you. And from an audit trail, you can see what service you are paying for. So this is an area which we see as an opportunity, which KRA could latch on to find out how this county is actually collecting different kind of revenues and the transactions that are happening, so that we raise that number of customer to government to a good level, and also ensure that everyone who's doing business or is receiving payment participates in paying tax.
And you've mentioned something that I think will take us to the next question. Thank you very much, Steve Shege, for that. What measures are being taken for harmonized tax streams and ensuring digitization of payment streams in all 47 counties? Steve has touched on that a bit, just streamlining and harmonizing everything. Who is this? You again, Rispa?
Yes.
This is your moment. So you will answer quite a few of the questions.
Yes, yes. He's actually touched on what we're doing, for example, with the Nairobi County. And I think for us, that also has been a very good learning point as to the various revenue streams that the counties are generating and what value then we can add, because as it is now, I'm proud to say as KRA that we've actually increased revenue on that front. And we believe we'll get, not yet where we want to be, but I'm sure we will get where we want to get to ensure that the revenue streams and taxes are appropriately collected. So again, we have a specific team that is called the Public Sector Division that specifically engages government and government-related entities. So again, like I said, a focused approach. And of course, in this category, then the counties fall in, so that then it's not everyone across KRA then focusing on these entities, but for this particular division, talking to them, relationship managers in that division within the domestic taxes department, talking to the counties, enhancing the capacity, even in terms of taxpayer education, because historically, and perhaps so, we've made many assumptions that taxes are there, the laws are there, read them and understand. But then again, you'll appreciate that we all read the same tax laws, but then sometimes we have disputes, not because we are not reading from the same revenue statutes, but we are reading the same, the wording, the same letter of the law, but then we have the dispute. So again, I'll go back to the earlier point of collaboration, but with a focused approach, so that then as we're bringing more counties and also ensuring, or rather reaching out to them to show that we can also add value in that space. So it's not about take and take. We are also giving and working together to ensure that then we deliver on this, on our mandate.
Okay. Here is another one. Digitization of government services is appreciated, but it needs to be done on a single platform rather than segmented platforms. There's a need for consolidation, like Huduma. I think you had taken us through the steps of, trying to ensure that you get as much information, and you want to look at all of these different government entities and organizations to get information on, an organization, and are they still in operation? Are they making profits? Are they, is it closure due to, the government, the business just collapsed? Right. Or are they trying to be, a little tricky and nefarious in their ways? And I guess this is you.
That
yes.
I can answer.
Yes.
We have to get everybody to pay their taxes. If they are required to pay, they should pay. And one of the challenges that's been there is that people take and consume government services, but they're not paying taxes where they should be actually paying taxes. So I mentioned even in my speech that one of the key moments for us is that now the Huduma number is going to be real and people will now be able to get it, because we needed the data commissioner to be in place. That's how the court said. And really this data protection, access to information, all those are very important laws that Kenya now has that will allow us to stitch all these things together. If you're in a business, you have your PIN, you have your Huduma number, all these are going to be in one place. So even if you're now going to migrate and try and hop around and do funny things, it will be clear. Your digital footprint will be very clear. It's not punitive. It's that you should pay your tax, then you pay what is due to Caesar, as he said. So we are providing this as government. So the Huduma number really is going to be the one central backbone. It's the msema kweli. It will say where you work, where you worked, which school you are in. It will give all your information. So when KRA wants to be able to, check and verify, they can be able to get all that information very quickly. The reason the data commissioner is there is to ensure that only those people that are validly allowed to check can actually check. So there's a lot of security and privacy that is incorporated, but it will ensure there's efficiency. And then, we're putting a one-stop shop first for the youth sector. We're doing that also for government, where you have one call center. But all this infrastructure is in the process of being finalized. And so for citizens, when you have that one number, when a policeman stops you, they have the digital OP if you're going to report an incident. If there's a crime, that same OP number is the one going to the court process as the case file that is being used. So everything can now be traced. Your land is digitized. It's tied to your Huduma number, so someone else cannot come and start claiming your title and so on. And then KRA will still come and say, well, have you paid your rates or taxes? So all this information will become available because we have access to data. And I believe if we can get more people paying taxes, then the tax per person actually can even go down. And that's where KRA is really pushing hard. Increase the base, reduce the amount.
And that would certainly make RISPA's work easier. To be able to track and trace, you have this single source of truth. It's this one portal where you can go and get all of the information. And, they're just, centralizing that and having greater communication between all the entities of government that are necessary. I believe we have time to take a few more questions. There was one here regarding let me see. What measures has KRA put in place for tax simplification measures to ease the payment of taxes? For example, efficiency of systems and implementation of tax laws changes, as this has been a challenge, particularly with the iTax platform.
Me again.
You again.
Okay. So simplification of taxes has been a big issue again, and listening to the concerns of our stakeholders, basically all the taxpayers. And we've done quite a bit in this area. I cannot belabor the fact that even with the presence of iTax, like every system, it's prone to its own challenges. But we have continued to simplify things based, and this is all having received feedback from what our stakeholders would want to see, what would make it easier for them. And our latest technology is M-Service, and I think it was alluded to earlier. M-Service, download an app, a click, and even the registration process is very simple, so that then you don't have, because we've appreciated that not everybody, even during these COVID times, not everyone then has an access to a table, a desktop, a laptop, a computer, an iPad. But from the convenience of your phone, because most of us then have smartphones now, whether Android-based or iOS-based. But as it is now, we've currently have the feature operational on the Android supported. So with the M service, that's one of our key areas where we've tried to simplify registration, payment, and to basically bring efficiency in the compliance aspect of tax.
I want to just add that the simplification subject is very high on the board's agenda.
Yeah.
And the objective is to continue pushing simplification, make it easier. Then the compliance levels should increase.
Yes, indeed. I guess there was one question. I don't know if I'll have time for it, but I will continue to do so. I think here we go again. This would be the final one because we really do want to wrap up now. We've got about a few minutes to end this. The initiatives to go digital in tax collection and return filing are noble. There is a key issue, however, that you have to deal with towards ensuring that the implementation of these digital systems is comprehensively done from end to end. That will be enabling filing, but also facilitating reconciliation and allocation of taxes paid. That's an interesting one as well.
Yeah. Whisper.
Yes. Whisper, what date of the month you have earned your pay this month? I mean, if in just today's session, just answering all of these questions,
Right.
very helpful.
So the question here is how to ensure, however, that you have to deal with towards ensuring that the implementation of these digital systems is comprehensively, so end to end.
Yes.
End to end. As it is now, like I said earlier, starting from iTax. You see, the taxation of the digital economy, it's taxation of that space or tax being collected from that space is not new. It's just that the concept is relatively new, but taxation remains because it's business transactions. So the question here is, how do we then ensure that, I think from what I get from this is that first, even our data is captured correctly, simplification, because you're talking about enabling filing, facilitating reconciliation. We actually have a team that is dealing specifically with that to even clean up our data, because again, this has been concerned from the industry. So cleaning up our data to ensure that even as we start off, remember, with everything that we do, we get better because of lessons learned. And I love saying this, lessons learned. So in every situation where we have teething problems, you learn a lesson from it. And as we are starting something new, then you bring different parties together because everyone in their different spaces then can add value. Sometimes some aspects seem very mundane, but they can actually overturn all the gains that we have made. So again, even within, and that's what we're calling our internal stakeholders, putting our heads together with the support, great support of our board, because the board also, they look at what the process, and of course, they're also hearing what the market is saying. So even as we continue to work together from a governance perspective, we obtain feedback as we're responding to questions, as we're trying to plug the gaps, so that even as we commence on this digital taxation in 1st January, we get it right the first time. Thank you.
Allow me to take those as your closing remarks, because I think you've ended it very well about learning as you go and working with stakeholders and it being a collaborative process, so to ensure you get it right the first time, and even then to just continue to make the process more efficient.
Yep.
And making that easier for the taxpayer, because
Correct.
the easier it is, the
better the compliance.
the better the
Yeah.
compliance. Ms. Kendi, perhaps your final remarks?
Okay, thank you, Yvonne. I'll start as a taxpayer, and anytime as a taxpayer you see a message from KRA, as much as you're a law-abiding, tax-compliant individual, the first thing that goes is, what do I now owe? And this is because we've primarily seen KRA as a policing body, which yes, to a good extent, it's your role. But what I would want to challenge Carrie on, could you use technology? And I put this out to you, but we can work with you. By we, Microsoft, whomever else you choose. Could you use technology to shift between control and self-compliance? And the best way to do that is by improving the user experience for the taxpayer. Because, and how you improve the user experience is showing the value that I have as a taxpayer by engaging with you. And this has been alluded, that's why I love this conversation. When we get the process from end to end covered, and when we increase the platform to which, or the base to which tax is collected, then cumulatively, we are actually bringing the tax burden lower for the taxpayer, which in that case, as a taxpayer, is music to my ears. But when you also communicate and educate as much as you can, and give me as much information as I would need to have as a taxpayer, then I know I can be compliant so easily. And it's very straightforward then to engage with you. So I take that position as a taxpayer, but I also take it as a person who can work with you, understanding technology, who can work with you to ease that journey. So embrace technology, work with us, and let's walk this journey of transformation.
Thank you, Ms. Kendi. Mr. Shah, your final remarks?
I think, as we often hear, there are two things certain in life, tax and death. So tax is here to stay with us. It's how, as an authority, we can make it easier to engage with the taxpayer. I think one of our objectives is to remove the word authority and move to Kenya Revenue Service.
Okay.
So that then we recognize that it's not the policeman coming in.
Right.
And that's a big push in the next corporate plan, which will be effective from next year. I think the mindset also of the team in KRA, and I mean all the staff, is changing towards providing a service. And it's very, very humbling at times to get comments from the taxpayer out there to say, you know what, I was actually surprised by the response I got. And that's happening more and more. And I think that's a very positive step. So it's all about working together. We will not solve the problem in isolation, in silos. But if taxpayers and the KRA and other stakeholders identify issues, we can work towards solutions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I like the idea of the Kenya Revenue Service. There's many people who really panic when you see an email from KRA.
Yeah.
Even the Happy Customer Service Week, and you see KRA and you think, oh no, what have I done now? How much do I owe? Engineer Thao, your final comments?
Thank you, Yvonne. I think my final comment is actually very simple. We're open to serve you. And we're open at Times Tower, we're open at our customer service centers, our call centers. Try us. See that we're able to facilitate you openly, easily, to be able to, for both of us to achieve our objectives. So try us. We're at the same time offering in the event that you try us and it's not satisfactory, that we have an anonymous reporting system that is being launched, that again, you can report and say that what you received was not satisfactory. So we're open and we're ready to serve. Thank you.
Indeed, thank you very much. CS Musheru, as part of this panel and this conversation, please close the session and give us your final word.
Thank you very much. I think we are addressing a very complex area. And I think I've had, many people are looking for a simpler way to do this, but it's not as straightforward. Before you plant coffee or tea, you export it overseas, you import it as Nescafe, and you pay sometimes 20 times how much it costs. Today, you buy your phone, You buy your airtime, you take your pictures, your data, you upload it, and now you download and are paying a lot of money and making billions for many other people. So KRA has the challenge of working out in that process. Where do they tax? Where do they manage to ensure that as we build these big businesses, how do we get there? And I think as a country, we want to work together with businesses, with the individuals, so that we grow our country. And that's what all this building bridges is about. Not a politician, but we're building bridges in this whole process. And I think with KRA and the work that is being done within government, within the counties, we should be able to see a much better, robust digital environment that is going to work for us. The president launched the digital economy blueprint in Kigali because we're part of the continental free trade area as well as the Smart Africa Alliance, where we've now got over 30 countries and creating a single digital market. If we do not get our taxation processes right, we will be swallowed in that whole process and we may lose out. And so I laud the KRA and the teams for all the work that they're doing to ensure that they are part of that growth and part of that development. Sure, Kendi and all the other partners we work with in the sector, we're not victimizing anyone that is successful or the multinationals. Actually, we want to all grow together. Increase the tax base, the burden will be less on the individual. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Cabinet Secretary, Ministry of ICT, Joseph Musheru. We thank you for that. Thank you for being so gracious to stay with us and to continue to just provide insights from the ministry in this space. And my thanks as well to all of the panelists who are up here with us. Asante Sana, and thanks as well to Pascal Sanama, who was with us a little early and had to leave us early. And my thanks as well, even though we're not able to finish connecting with him, Rafael Kamoto from ATAF is a Strategic Partnership Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation Director at that organization. I want to close this before we take a photo, because like we said, if we don't take a photo, it never happened. We'll take that photo in just a moment, but I'd just like to make an announcement as to where we go next. You get a lunch break for about 2 hours, but because we're in Africa, I want to say we can be back here by 2 o'clock, please. Even for those of us who are on Zoom, please come back at 2 so that we start at exactly 2:30. Remember to keep tweeting. The hashtag is Tax Summit 2020. And in the next session, we'll now be taking a look at some of the innovative approaches towards sustaining economies, particularly in the COVID-19 era. The new normal, the next normal, building better, some of the things that we will be discussing in the next segment. And that is from 2 o'clock, so I hope we can see you back here then. Remember to continue to stay safe, practice social distancing, sanitize, and put on your mask correctly. At this point, I'd like to ask the panelists, please stand so we can just take a photo and remember this moment. It has indeed been an interesting time. Continuing with this 6th annual Tax Summit, even under these extraordinary circumstances, and to continue to have conversations that will build forward, build better. And in the meantime, we can just continue to remind you of what your taxes do for economic development in the country. Bwana Musheru, please join us up here once again for this photo, even as we play the video. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. As I say with the mask, you have to really smile so it shows in your eyes. Thank you very much. Continue to stay with us. At 2 o'clock, we should be back. Asante sana Bwana CS. Thank you, Mr. Board Chair, Commissioner General. Asanteni sana, and all members of the board and other commissioners as well. Have a good afternoon. Back at 2 p.m. Enjoy your lunch break.